Hello, this is Dan Farisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator and host of AV Plus, welcoming you to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. Usually, of course, our podcast comes out on Friday, but this is a very special Wednesday. This is March 8th. International Women's Day, and we're delighted to have some true luminaries from the commercial AV industry joining us for what we hope is a really vibrant and important conversation about equity. It's all coming to you right now on AV Plus. As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify. I'm so delighted to be joined by four of the most powerful, influential, well-respected women in the commercial AV industry. We're joined by Tammy Fuqua, who is Developer Partner Manager Q-SYS, Co-Chair of the AVIXA Women's Council, and LAOC Co-Leader for the AVIXA Women's Council. Also, Althea Ricketts, who is Vice President of Corporate Initiatives at Shure, member of the AVIXA Leadership Search Committee, member of the AVIXA Foundation Board, and member of the WAVIT Board. Susan Whilhite, who is BDM for Enterprise at SnapOne, one of the founder directors at WAVIT, and LAOC co-leader for the AVIXA Women's Council. And last but certainly not least, Ericka Shumpert, who is Event Marketing Manager, AVI-SPL, and one of the leads for the AVIXA Women's Council Tampa group. Thank you so much, one and all, for joining me. I'm honored and delighted to be having you here on the AV Plus podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Indeed.
Thank you.
So as I said at the outset, we want to be talking about equity all the time, every day of the year, but especially today to mark International Women's Day. And I want to start the conversation with equity and what it means to embrace it. I don't want equity just to be a slogan or a word. I want to know what embracing equity means. And I don't know that I could ask better, more qualified people than the four of you who are so involved in so many aspects of trying to foster equity in our industry. What does it mean to embrace it? How do we do this?
Well, I think within the AV industry, I think a lot of that has to do with fairness in pay, opportunities for advancement, and fairness in daily work experiences. Whether that's in the office or on site or even at a trade show, the equity needs to be spread through the whole industry. And I think one other thing is that I would love to see more female executives within the industry, so that way that we have role models as we're working through the industry. That was something that I didn't have when I was coming up in the industry, and I would love to see more.
So before we can even talk about equity, are we all aligned on what equity means? You hear, I want to be equal, I want to be treated equal, and then all of a sudden we hear equity. So what does equity mean? So equal, I want a same opportunity across the board, right? But we know that not everyone starts at the same starting line, right? So for me, equity means that giving those that we know or providing various levels of support depending on your specific need. And for women in our industry, we know our specific need is increasing our voice. We definitely have capable females. We have a pool of females, but are we hearing their voices? Not so much right now. So that's what it means for me.
I'd just like to piggyback off of that. Althea, I think, has a great point in the sense that, they say equality versus equity, making a level playing field, but it's providing more than that. Meaning there are some people that need different resources. What might work for one person doesn't work for another. So it's taking those three different people that have three different needs, but providing them with the tools that are needed for them each to be successful in their role.
Absolutely. And I will echo what has already been said. For me, it's, definitely, as Althea mentioned, understanding what equity means, first and foremost, that it is not the same as equality. taking more time to actually think about equity and what it means in a particular situation, in a particular company, and then prioritizing it, not just having it as something that you say, that you talk about, like a buzzword that you use because of the current times, but actually make it a priority in your daily operations, and then take action. And as Susan just stated, you want to find ways to give people what they need to be successful. That's what equity is about.
And I really appreciate you kind of recentering the conversation to some extent, Althea, with what is the definition of equity, because I do think it requires some clarification in terms of what is equality versus what is equity. If you kind of analogize it to like a race starting line, it would be willfully ignorant to think that everyone starts from the same starting line. It would be to deny structural impediments. It would be to deny institutional factors, institutional racism or sexism, all these other factors that make this imaginary equal starting line for all people non-existent. And if we're going to achieve equity, we need to realize that not everyone is starting from the same point because of those structural factors, both societal and personal.
Right. I think part of what the recognition of that is just to improve equity, you have to also acknowledge the inequities that we're facing. I think that's one thing that is kind of like the elephant in the room, is like trying to bring out these inequities that we need to work on. That's one of the things I think that we need to face in this industry in particular.
So privilege seems to be a triggering word for a lot of people, right? So I'm a Jamaican American and I have extreme privilege in my position. But when we hear privilege, we think of white privilege. And it's not to say that there's no struggle if you have privilege. It's not to say that you don't have challenges if you have privilege, but it speaks to what you say, Dan. You are born or you enter this environment with some advantages just by the way you look. And if we could all understand that and understand that that in and of itself is a privilege, and that gives you a little head start above everyone else, we can all align around how do we need to help the others that didn't have that privilege at the very beginning, right? So I have privilege because of my opportunity in education and my work, my financial status, but that doesn't mean that I haven't struggled because of the tone of my skill or my gender, right? But I have privilege as well. But it's very triggering, I find, whenever the conversation around privilege goes, it's immediately, oh, I don't have privilege just because of. So, but we have to acknowledge that. We do.
We do have to acknowledge that, as thorny as it might be for some, or people feel like, they're being singled out or being identified as, oh, you're the problem or something like that. I think what we do, to your point, is we need to recognize reality. And a lot of people, myself included, I think, have a desire to be an ally. I want to know from your perspective what allyship means. If people do have privilege, either by virtue of the color of their skin or by their gender or by their education or by whatever it is, however they've attained that privilege. If people genuinely want to be allies, not just virtue signal, but actually be allies, what can they do?
Speak up.
Yep.
Become educated, not rely on a marginalized group for your education. Be in the conversation, join an employee resource group and learn about the struggles that women have in this industry, or the struggles that people of color have in their work life. That's the most basic. It being part of the conversation, to me, is the ultimate starting point, is that you come to the conversation, you have some education that you've brought to that, you walk away from it and say, okay, I need to learn a little more, but be there and be part of that conversation.
I would say exactly what Ericka said, speaking up, but keeping the conversation going, you know, you don't have to be confrontational, but, you know, the way you can do it is, you know, supporting the women, the minorities, the, you know, the diversity, by supporting them with awards, by including them in the conversation, by sharing their posts, by acknowledging them, by, you know, trying to understand and helping to promote those inequities. It's around awareness. And I know Tammy and Althea, you guys have stuff to add to this too.
So for me, there is no growth without allies. And my biggest allies have been male allies, because they're able to show an example to their colleagues that might not be at the same place in their journey, right? Because we're all at different places. You know, I'm all the way down at mile 22 at a marathon, but we know that there's some people that are just starting. But my biggest allies have been male, and my biggest allies and women have been allies as well. Women that have paved the way, women that have had successes, women that have been in meetings with me who has said, hey, Althea wants to say something. You know, can we hear what she has to share? So allyship for me is using your voice of power to help someone else who you know doesn't have that voice right now. And it's critical, because as much as we're growing and as much as our voices are becoming more amplified, we absolutely know that we still are not in the power seat in most of the time. So we need to have those folks that are our allies. So it's critical for us moving forward, allyship for me.
The only thing I was going to add was, you know, if you're witnessing something that is not equitable, then, you know, demand that from your organizations that you work for, or for that person that you're seeing isn't benefiting from it, then keeping that conversation going and demanding it from, you know, the places that you work, I think are also very vital as an ally.
And making sure to offer platforms to those who may not typically be offered those platforms. Our associate editor, Amma Loretti, just turned in a draft to me on a feature she's working on. She spoke with Alicia Henley and Ifat Chaudhry about the idea of panels in our industry and how so many of them are not representative of society at large, and how oftentimes organizers will build a panel either composed entirely or mostly of white males, and then have that last minute thinking like, oh, I need to find minority representation or diversity representation. Then it's a scramble to try to reach out to people and add them in at the last minute. What Amala's piece is going to be about is the idea of having intentionality in crafting these panels and these discussions, and also not just thinking that members of marginalized groups are going to want to talk about issues pertaining to diversity and equity and inclusion, but also invite members of underrepresented groups to talk about technical topics and business topics and all these other areas, because it's not as though women only want to talk about women's issues or African Americans only want to talk about Black issues. That's not the case either. We need to think beyond the idea of putting people into silos or categories in that way. Is that something that resonates with you? Is that something that you feel and see?
That absolutely resonates with me. And here's an example. The other part of my job is sustainability. And I was actually invited to be on a panel around sustainability in the UK. And needless to say, I was the only woman, and needless to say, I was the only woman of color. But it was encouraging that I wasn't invited to talk about women and gender in sustainability or African-American people in sustainability. It was literally an invitation to talk about sustainability, and they were looking towards my opinion. So that's encouraging as well. That's not to say I haven't been invited to panels to talk about race, but it's encouraging that, you know, they're moving past that, or that was an example for me.
You know, that also, you know, resonates, you know, with me, you know, that we do need to be intentional about looking at people and saying, what do they have to offer? And again, it goes back to that, finding ways to help people to be successful, meeting them where they're at and helping to bolster them to be successful. And it's, seeing, a woman of color and saying, here's what Althea has to offer. This is all the ways that, all the knowledge that she brings. She's a subject matter expert in these things. I should be trying to get her on stage. What events are coming up that I can put her on stage or put her on a panel to talk about it. It's that prioritizing and then taking that action. And as you said, being intentional about that, and looking at, Althea or Tammy, not just saying, well, I want Tammy to speak on women's issues, but looking at Tammy and saying, what all does Tammy have to offer? What things can Tammy present on a panel or, on the stage by herself, even not even having to be in a panel, right? As that one woman. So it goes back to, like I said, prioritizing and then taking action.
Can I just jump in for a minute? And I wanted to say it when you said it, Dan, and you reminded me, Ericka, the word intentional is really important. When you talk to people and they're like, we're crawling, we're not at the walk stage or we're not running yet. I always respond to them, are you intentionally crawling, right? Because intent is really important, really important. And I liked when you mentioned it recently, Dan, and you reminded me, Ericka, as well. Intention is super important because you have to be intentional in these things. It's not going to happen organically or naturally.
Althea brings up a great point. It's having those tough conversations. And that's one of the reasons I love working with Althea on WAVIT is she's making me think. And that's what we need to do, is we need to bring awareness. And, men may, or other, I don't mean to target men, but they may unintentionally do something and they repeat that action over and over again. And some of my biggest allies have been men, and they've been great mentors. And I think the way we're going to do this and facilitate the change is through these outreach programs, through STEM programs, through mentoring, through small groups. And it comes down to awareness and intention.
On that topic of awareness, I just recently came back from NSCA BLC, where Corey Schaefer received an honor, and she was talking about something that I know is near and dear to her, which is bringing more women into the industry. The disappointment she feels to some extent that although we've made progress in terms of our numbers over the course of her illustrious career, we have not made progress near toward parity. And actually during the pandemic, we lost women net as part of the industry. So you'd mentioned, Susan, some of the ways we perhaps can support STEM programs and industry outreach and things of that nature. But keeping with the topic of intentionality, how do you think we can intentionally welcome more women into the fold, welcome more women into STEM careers, welcome more women into the commercial AV family?
I think, like we were saying before, the awareness and the intention, it's acknowledging these equities. It is, pushing, as Tammy said, pushing your company and other companies to hire more women, to hire more minorities, to retain and attract them. This DEI work that we're doing, it really starts with inclusion and them feeling a belonging. Inclusion is the first step of making sure that we're having new blood in our industry, and building better leaders, putting, what do they say, for every 100 managers that get promoted, that are men, 86 of them are women. So, promoting more women, getting more women into, executive roles, getting more women on teams, having more opportunities for advancement for women, I think will open up the door for more women to join this industry too.
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. I mean, you have the problem of trying to get women into the industry, and then how to keep them in the industry is the second part. Dan, as you mentioned, during the pandemic, a lot of women had to leave their jobs, and quite frankly, a lot of them did not come back to the AV industry. And I think a lot of that is because of some of the bias that they were experiencing in this industry. And I think at the time, and it's still very prevalent, it's hard for a woman to continue their career on a trajectory into executive positions and things. I'm lucky enough to have some women role models that are in executive positions, and that's what I think is a highlight that we should try to keep showing. Just all of the things that we've all been talking about are very important on trying to keep women in this industry. And then the other parts of getting more into the industry, like by, the different programs that we all work with, AVIXA Women's Council, the WAVIT, and all these women's groups, I think are vital in growing a woman's career. At least it was for me. And I try to emphasize that when I'm talking about the AVIXA Women's Council or any other women's group that interests women.
So I might bring a little different flavor. I think by the time we get to the Women's Council and the college recruiting and even the high school recruiting, it's too late. I want to say that we need to start like in grade school and middle school, because a lot of folks don't even know this industry exists, right?
Exactly.
So STEM starts really early. How do we inject that in those little girls that didn't even think that audio or technology was an option for them? Start early. That's where I'm at. The AVIXA Foundation Board, we're focused on education and getting new entrants, and I'm challenging them. I don't want to talk about internships and stuff. I want to get deeper, because that's how it starts, right? It's an evolution. But also, yes, internships and such delights and apprenticeships and getting that avenue into the industry is also good. I am happy to kind of say our internship program for this coming year at Shure, 50% women.
That's right.
Fantastic.
And that was intentional, right? I mean, because we went after, we have stretch goals. We're a 100-year-old company and we've had 4 CEOs. 50% of them have been women. We have a stretch goal to kind of, to your point, Tammy, you can't be it if you don't see it. So increasing our executive leadership with our CIO is a female. Our head of HR is a female. Our CEO is a female. So if you don't see it, you won't think you can be it. So that representation, Tammy, I completely agree with you, is paramount in getting more entrants into the industry.
And that's, I'm thinking along the same lines as you, Althea, when you use that quote. It's actually a quote that Girls Who Code uses, and Dr. Barrett, if you can't be it if you don't see it. And it's that same thing, reaching out to girls, teaching them coding, teaching them about a career in programming and then technology at that early age, but also not just seeing that there's a career out there for it, but then seeing those women executives, seeing those women leaders. So it is both. It's reaching them much earlier and then allowing them to see, women in those positions, in leadership roles, and being able to hear their inspirational stories of how they paved the way. So we need to do both. Really at all levels, starting young, the internships, reaching them as they're coming out of college, reaching women within the companies, as you said, Tammy, with retention, making sure that those women that are already there, that are maybe not growing in their careers or not feeling like there's a path for them, making sure that we're meeting them where they're at. Again, there's that equity of, what do you need to get you to the next level? What do you need to feel successful in your position? So making sure we're also working on the ones that are already in our companies and in our organizations.
Yeah, I think one of the most common things I get asked, and this is going into like why you would want to change old practices. A lot of times a HR person will say, I really want to hire a woman. I put a rec out and I get 100 applicants and they're all women or all men. And I said, well, maybe it's your terminology in your the rec that you're putting out. Maybe it's where you're putting that job, where you're posting it. You know, there's so many different factors that will help you in recruiting women, but you have to make sure you're looking at the whole picture, not just I'm sending out an application or a rec and I'm like wanting women to apply. How are you doing that? So that's like the main question I always get asked by anyone from HR. So it's just changing old practices. You know, the rec that they're putting out might have been one that they maybe put together 15 years ago, and they just keep rinsing and repeating. And that rec might say, you must be able to lift 50 pounds. And, you know, maybe a woman might look at that and go, well, I can't lift 50 pounds, so I'm not going to apply. It's looking at the whole picture to help in that recruitment.
And that rinse and repeat mindset is just anathema to the intentionality that we've talked about. The idea that we're going to proactively seek to build an inclusive environment where everyone can be a stakeholder, everyone can be part of the table. And we're not going to do that if we're just rinsing and repeating what we've been doing since 1995 or 2005. We need to be proactive. We need to be intentional. We need to change what we are doing in order to ensure that our industry looks like the society it serves and looks like the communities of which we're part.
Correct.
And definitely. Well, and then going back just one more step to ally, I mean, Dan, when you have people like you that are allowing women to voice, you know, these issues and these concerns, that's what allyship is about, is being able to have that voice continue and having that platform. So it's great when we do have these opportunities where people ask us, you know, what our opinions are and how change can happen. How can we affect the change that we want to see? It's by having, you know, great allies. So
I think it's incredibly important for Commercial Integrator to use the platform it has and the influence it has to try to be an ally as an organization, as a platform for our industry, because we know and we see it across society when boardrooms and when decision-making tables look like society and they have a diversity of viewpoints and they have a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of backgrounds and life experiences, the decisions are better than a homogenous, just majoritarian kind of a boardroom or a conference room. As we begin to close up the podcast, I'd like to end, if possible, on a positive note, because so much progress has been made, even though there's still tremendous work to be done. And you mentioned, Althea, with respect to Shure, you know, the 50-50 parity of the intern program. Is there anything else positive, anything else hopeful that we can kind of look at as a lodestar and say, this can make us feel good. This is where we should be going?
I have an example. So one of my God, I hate to say it, but sheroes, you know, nomenclature. But one of the people I look up to is a woman by the name of Telva Magruder. She's a Chief Diversity and Equity Inclusion Officer at General Motors. And she is also on the board of directors for her local Girl Scout organization. One of the things she shared with me a while back was, you know, back in the day, you would get a badge for, you know, homemaking. You would get a badge for, you know, dressmaking. She said, we now have badges, to your point, Ericka, on coding. We now have badges where you can get for audio, or we can have badges that are focused on that STEM kind of reality. So that, to me, is very encouraging, and that to me gives me hope. You know, as I sunset my career in this industry, one of the things I want to do is what folks did for me, is how do I bring them along? So that's my focus, and that's why I'm so excited about WAVIT and what we can do with that board. How can we move the needle for those that are coming? And they are coming. And I think the ladies on this podcast are the originators, the the drivers, the force that will make them come in forces. So that's how I envision the role that we take and our value in the conversation. So Susan, Tammy, Ericka, blessed to be in your company.
Same.
Thank you. Same.
Yeah.
Well, I will say a positive that I see, and even just looking at, the women in this group and the organizations that we all represent, the organization that you represent, just the fact that you think about these companies and these organizations, AVIXA, a few years ago came out with their pledge for an equitable future that they asked companies and individuals to sign. And that level of awareness, when you hear companies like, again, these companies are, with ERGs, and especially ones, that are established for gender equity, and, having that conversation within these large organizations that we represent, that when you see the conversations about allyship, and we have an ally, and you, Dan, and everyone here, that is the good in it, that we're seeing it. And yes, we still have a long way to go. We're not, where we should be with representation, with equity, with, our pay. We know that we've got some work to do, but to see that we're all talking about it, we're all taking action. These large companies, these large organizations are raising this awareness on a daily basis. That's the positive I see right now.
I reiterate everything Ericka and Althea said. It's cultivating the mindset, helping to forge equity, embracing equity, breaking the bias, leaning in, and it's the power of peer support.
I'll use one of Althea's words, which is intentionality. And the reason why I say that is because there was a time when I started in this industry, just about every woman I met fell into this industry by accident. And now I'm starting to see more intentionality in coming into this industry, which is, obviously something I really want to see. And I think everyone wants to see. So, I really think we're starting to get there. As we've said, we have a ways to go, but by doing this, even the smallest of steps into bringing more women into this industry, or allowing young girls to know about this industry, will grow this industry more. And that's hopefully by the time I decide to do my own retirement, I'll see more of that as it comes along. So that's my take.
Well, I want to thank all four of you for being on the AV Plus podcast today on International Women's Day. But more importantly, I want to thank all of you for your work and for your leadership and for your vision and for the fact that you are driving this industry in a better, more inclusive, more diverse, and safer direction for everyone who is part of the industry. I'm grateful for everything that you do, and I think our industry owes leaders like you a debt of gratitude for helping show us the way.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Platform.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, ladies, and thanks, Dan.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ericka and Tammy and Althea and Susan, for being on AV Plus today. My name is Dan Farisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator and host of AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. Please check back on commercialintegrator.com each and every day for more thought-provoking and insightful content just like this. Have a great day.